Here we are again for the third time in the fourth quarter. The Aztecs have the ball up 11 with a chance to basically put the game away with either a touchdown, a field goal, or in this case, just a couple first downs would essentially run the clock out because Fresno State would have to use 2 timeouts and then they wouldn't be able to stop the clock. So literally 2-3 first downs on this drive ends the game and the Aztecs win by 11. On first down, they hand the ball to Kristen and he gets a couple, had a decent opening for 3 yards, and Fresno State uses its second timeout. So, I think you'd like to get a little bit more than 3, but that's not a bad play call. I think getting 3, considering how the first play of the last drive went for a loss of 3, this was a good start to this drive, and it gives you some more possibilities on second down that you probably wouldn't have if you were looking at second 13. So here's a second down, and Josh Simmons gets called for. Actually, no, this was Uluave gets called. No, it was Josh Simmons. All right, Josh Simmons, his 4th penalty of the game. And that definitely hurt because, as I just said, 2nd and 7 gives you so many more possibilities, and now suddenly you're looking at 2nd and 12, and that just the running game in this scenario is just not good enough to overcome these penalties. So 2nd and 12, it ends up being a RPO. Maiden doesn't like the throw. I think he was looking at Matthews for potentially a slant. He keeps it and ends up getting 2 to make it a 3rd and 10. It was a safe decision in this case because if throwing an incomplete pass stops the clock, at least in this case, you keep the clock running and make Fresno State use their last timeout. So here is an interesting, a 3rd and 10. Aztecs go to 0 personnel, meaning they've got 5 receivers and Maiden. Actually, this is a 1 personnel or a 0-1 personnel because this is Mark Redmond out here, the tight end who's lined up as a receiver. But they're essentially have gone 5 wide, spread out the defense. You've got 2 deep safeties here, and then it looks like at least they're going to have no more than 4 rushers here, unless they decide to bring a blitz and have a safety cover. So they get this. I want to point out here. Let's actually Mark Redmond. Most of these guys are running short stuff. It looks like the guy out here, this guy, and Shavers. Shavers hasn't made a break yet, but it looks to me like the number 1 option on this play, and maybe the only option, was Mark Redmond running a stop and go. I can't remember the last time I've seen San Diego State run a stop and go route with a tight end. And to call it on this critical play is interesting. You'd have to think that they were confident with this play call. This is something that they ran in practice plenty of times successfully. And to be frankly honest, Redmond has a step. This guy gets beaten and he's almost falling down, and you can see Redmond puts up his left hand. Redmond had a step, had him beat, but you can already see here that Maiden didn't love it, didn't want to take the chance, and started rolling out. Let's go back and see it in real time. But it looked to me that Maiden, if he could have waited another split second, Redmond did have an opportunity, and Maiden just did the smart thing at that point once he's rolled out to get a couple yards and go out of bounds. Now in the NFL, under 5 minutes, if you go out of bounds, the clock stops, not in college. So I think maybe going out of bounds might have saved 5 seconds, because I think the clock doesn't restart until the ball is spotted by the referee. So it was a smart move not to take a hit or anything like that. But still, 3rd and 10, they tried to be aggressive. They called a stop and go with a tight end who I think had a step. Maiden didn't feel comfortable making that throw, and instead, tucked it and run it. But that was a chance, if they can complete that pass and get a first down and probably get about 25, 30 yards. At this point, the game is the worst case scenario, they can run the clock down to under 2 minutes left. And that's if they just go 3 and out and don't get another first down. And then they're probably punting from midfield, backing Fresno State up, inside the 10 or whatever. So another missed opportunity that I think, interesting play call, but you'd have to think that the players and the coaches felt comfortable in that play call. It was just not executed like they would have wanted. Here's a key play here is Browning's back, by the way. He looked a little funny with his left leg when he kicked, but one thing to note here, we mentioned Jesse Matthews' muffed punt that went forward and recovered by an onslaught of Fresno State guys who were right in front of him. We mentioned Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon unable to fall on the fumble from Maiden, just a drive ago that Fresno State recovered. Here's another one where Nico Remigio drops the ball, but the ball, or muffs the punt, but the ball ends up, there's so much probably speed on the ball, because it was a line drive kick. There was not a lot of hang time on that the ball went backwards about 10, 12 yards. And look at this bounce right there. The fact that as Remigio was coming towards that ball, and that ball took a bounce straight up softly into his hands, I think Fresno State has to feel fortunate, because otherwise there was multiple San Diego State guys that are probably going to dive on that ball if the ball took, a kind of a different or a shorter hop in this case. But here's the hop again. Look at this bounce right there. That's about as easy to recover for a punt returner off of a muff than you would think. So that's just another, knowing how the outcome of the game was, when you look back on all these plays and you look at what if, there's a little bit of bad luck as well, and good luck for Fresno State and bad luck for San Diego State. Now, Fresno State obviously has a 1st and 10 from their own 20 after that punt recovery by Remigio from his drop. There's 3:55 left in the game. They've got to go 80 yards. They've got to score a touchdown or get a field goal. And then they've got to, basically at this point, because they have 0 timeouts left, unless they score in a minute a touchdown or a field goal, they don't have the luxury to be able to kick off, get a 3 and out, and get the ball back and still have time to get a tying score or a winning score. Because, as an offense, if you go 3 and out, you can take up about 2 minutes of clock just literally from kneeling without the other team having timeouts. So the Aztecs are still in terrific position here, because with 3:55 left, if they give up a score, if that score happens in 2-3 minutes, then Fresno State doesn't have the luxury of being able to kick off and get the ball back, and it would hinge entirely on an onside kick. Most coaches in this scenario are going to play a prevent defense. I don't care if you're at the college level, high school level, NFL level. There's no defensive coach in this league that's going to, especially from backed up onto their 20 with 80 yards to go in this scenario that I just described, that the worst thing you can do as a defense is give up a 70-yard touchdown in 20-30 seconds and let the other team be able to kick off and get the ball back after 3 and out. Every coach in football is going to play conservative in this sense. Doesn't mean that they're not going to bring a blitzer, but they're probably not going to rush 5 or 6 in this scenario. One thing as I did notice though is two things. One, I mentioned the fatigue from the prior drive. If you'll notice here, San Diego State has their 3 backup defensive linemen in the game. You've got Garrett Fountain, who plays extensively. So even though he's not a starter, he is a backup. He does get a lot of extended time. But then you've got Nazir Sims and Daniel Opoko on the defensive line. No Jonah Tavai, no Keyshawn Banks, no Justice Tavai. And they end up only rushing 3 for most of this drive. This is an 11-play drive. And I believe other than 2 plays, once the Fresno State got into the red zone, they rushed 3 on every one except for 2, which they rushed 4. So, as I said, most defensive coaches are going to play conservative and keep the offense in front of you, because in this scenario, the worst thing you can do is get beat deep and give up an 80-yard play in 30 seconds, and then the Fresno State is feeling good because they don't have to get an onside kick anymore. Does Kurt Maddox look back on it and say we should have rushed 4 more times than we did, or should have gone with my starting defensive line in this case? Maybe, I don't know what the fatigue and the tired levelness was. But those are 2 things that popped out to me on this drive that I think hurt this thing. Again, in hindsight, knowing what we know of how this game ended, you can pinpoint all of these things. At the end of the day, it came down to an onside kick, and a recovery on that would have given the Aztecs a 28-25 lead. But just looking back on it, I wonder if the coaching staff does wonder if they would have done this drive differently. But, as you can see, a lot of the corners and the safeties were giving the receivers cushion just to make sure they didn't get beat deep. But that gave Haener a lot of openings underneath for, anywhere from 6 to 12-yard passes that gave, let them move the ball down the field. They did end up scoring a touchdown on this drive, obviously, but they also spent, 3 minutes of game time scoring a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. And the Aztecs also had 2 offsides penalties on this drive. One was Nazir Sims on the 3rd play, which was called because he made contact with the center. And then Cooper McDonald had an offsides on a 3rd and 4 later in this drive that would have given Fresno State a first down anyway, but it gave them a free play, which they used to get a 20-yard pass completion on the outside. So this was definitely something where, in terms of substitution, in terms of aggressiveness with rushing, and also penalties, that really hurt San Diego State on this drive. Here's a 2-point conversion after they scored a touchdown. One other thing to note is not just the defensive line had the backups in, but Michael Shawcroft did not play on the first 6 snaps of this drive. So not only did they not have their best defensive lineman in there, but arguably their best defensive player all season, that's, making a case for conference defensive player of the year, also set out the first 6 plays. So, obviously the team, San Diego State, loves to rotate guys throughout the game. And obviously fatigue was setting in, but this is a scenario. I wonder if it was a 1-score game with 4 minutes to go, whether the starters would have been in there. I think maybe the coaching staff felt that, hey, we can buy some time off of at least the first set of downs or 2 set of downs on this drive with some of our backups in, because it's a 2-score game, and maybe we'll need to have to defend a second drive as well. But it was still a lot of what ifs, I believe, on this scenario. So that brings us to the onside kick. If the Aztecs recover this onside kick, they win the game. They kneel down twice and win the game 28-25. They don't recover. Obviously, Fresno State has a chance to, tie the game and send it into overtime with a field goal, or win the game with a touchdown. We all know how it worked. But as I said before on the Jesse Matthews fumble on the punt, I am not well versed in special teams strategy too much. So if there's anyone out there that is, feel free to comment, chime in, disagree with me, tell me that I'm wrong. But in this case, with Dallas Lynch shifting over to the left side and having 2 guys move over, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the bottom, and they've got 4 at the top, and then obviously the kicker. San Diego State only has 10 guys up front. As you'll see at the end of the play, Jordan Byrd is back deep somewhere here. When these guys shift left, Cedarius Barfield does move down, and I believe Caden McDonald shifts over a little bit. But, I wonder if one other person, maybe even McDonald or one of these guys, should have shifted more over to make sure that they weren't outnumbered on the side, a 6 versus, 4 or 5. Also with Jordan Byrd, is it common to have a guy deep on an onside kick when it's very unlikely that the kicking team is going to kick it over the heads of these 10 guys, right? In an onside kick, the kicking team recover is not allowed to advance it, so that you don't have to worry about a kicking team getting it and needing a deep guy to be the last guy to tackle. The other thing is with Jordan Byrd on this play, he was not in on offense in most of the second half. He wasn't in on punt return. He wasn't in on kickoff return, but he was in on this. So that adds the question, was it an injury? Was it performance? I don't know that as well. Last point I'll make before we see the play, San Diego State has 2 timeouts. If there's anything that they see from this alignment and this formation that gives them doubt or concern that they're not going to be able to cover this, or that they're outnumbered on one side, you got to call a timeout. Assuming that they did, because they didn't call a timeout, that they felt good about this. I think this is how the coaches wanted to line up and be in the position to execute. At the end of the day, they did not execute. Now, this was a great kick by Lynch, because if you'll notice, Shavers is in a pretty good spot. The ball, it's bouncing low. It's not taking any crazy bounces at this point. And, they look like they're in really good position, right? They've got these 3 guys, but none of these guys are even close. Shavers, with a normal bounce, is able to jump on it and not even have anyone close to him. But it takes a crazy bounce. In my opinion, I think it's a bit of luck, unless Dallas Lynch practices this every day and is able to make that crazy bounce. Maybe he can, but that's another case of, I think, just really bad luck on the part of the Aztecs and poor execution, because potentially maybe Shavers needs to take a step back and fall on the ball more with his body instead of try to catch it with his hands. I don't know. As I said, it's not my area of expertise, but regardless, you got to come down with the ball. Some of it was bad luck with that crazy bounce, because not only did it bounce up away from Shavers, but it bounced over Jesse Matthews' head as well. So a lot to go into it, but it put the San Diego State in a precarious position where suddenly they're looking at worst case scenario overtime and potentially a loss. We all know it only took Fresno State and Hainer one play to get a touchdown, but one thing I saw on replay that was interesting is I look at Jonah Tavai and look at Garrett Fountain. I think this is Garrett Fountain. Right before the snap, both of them end up pointing at either the center or the offensive line. At one point, Tavai actually gets on one knee, and as the ball is snapped, he's actually doesn't look like he's ready to rush in. He ends up making a nice rush, but I wonder if that hurt because he ends up rushing against the right tackle, and the throw ends up coming that way to the receiver. Obviously, Remigio makes Celestine miss a tackle and bakes it in. One thing to note, in that 11-play drive, actually in the 9-play drive at the start of the fourth quarter and the 11-play drive, I don't believe the Aztecs missed one tackle on those two drives. On those 20 plays, they didn't. I don't think they missed one tackle. And it's unfortunate that on this play, they miss one tackle that ends up going for another, 28 yards. Celestine is a great tackler. It's a reason why he became the starter. Just an unfortunate situation, and goes back to one of my ongoing themes of fatigue, right? The defense has pretty much been on the field the entire fourth quarter, especially the secondary, which we're not substituting, right? And all 5 guys in the secondary played, I believe, on every snap, with the exception of maybe one of the corners. I think Branch and Avenger might have been switching off, but Celestine and Barfield and McMorris were in on every play, and it just wasn't meant to be. It was disappointing the way this game finishes. So many missed opportunities, even before the onside kick, that would have, put the Aztecs in firm control of the game. But it's also frustrating that, an onside kick that usually has anywhere from a 4 to 10% success rate ends up essentially costing San Diego State the victory. Congrats to Fresno State. They're in the driver's seat for the Mountain West Division, and the Aztecs are reeling from this loss. Thanks, guys, for watching this breakdown. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Curious what all of your thoughts are in terms of some of these plays, the coaching decisions, the player execution, and feel free to comment in the YouTube comment section, and we'll talk to you guys next time.